The body is your anchor to objective reality. If you untie your boat from the shore of reality, then you start drifting into the ocean of subjective feelings. And that's dangerous. This video was made possible through the kind support of my sponsors over at Patreon. Patreon is a great way to help independent creators like myself produce original content. If you'd like to get more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much. So, shalom everyone. There are many things going on in the world right now, but I'm going to address just one of them, and that is the opening of the 2024 Olympic Games, which took place a couple of days ago. The Olympics are of course, a massive, massive international event. It began over 100 years ago, and its roots lie in classical Greece. And it's supposed to bring nations together in the spirit of sports and to forget about politics and so on. And Jews aren't so much into sports, religious Jews, traditional Judaism. But in our generation, our day and age, especially that we have a role today, Judaism has a role today to bring Torah to the entire world, I think it's important to address current events and take a look at them from a Jewish Torah perspective, because everything that's going in the world today, it means something, and we want to get a deeper understanding of it, and the best way to get the deepest understanding about everything that's going on is using Torah eyes, Torah concepts, and that's what we're going to try to do. Now, this event had, as it always does, it had a very big art-filled opening event, which had dance and music and a lot of spectacles. And in the middle of all of this, and this created a lot of buzz in the internet, that's how I heard about it, because I didn't watch it, but the buzz was that in the very middle of it was a longish segment involving transgender people. Transgender people, the transgender movement is all about, of course, people who identify with the opposite sex, who feel that their gender identity is different from the opposite sex, who feel that maybe they're non-binary or they have a fluid gender identity, and it also includes drag queens and bearded men with wearing dresses and all these things, and the pinnacle of this segment, which was, again, it lasted quite a meaningful amount of time, and the peak was that they did a kind of postmodern recreation of a very famous painting in the history of art, which is Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, right? It's a major Christian event, The Last Supper of Jesus, and very famous painting, and they did it, but it was all drag queens. It was very, very crazy and very offensive to Christians, and it was very, very sensational, and it was meant to be sensational and in fact divisive, which was part of the whole problem, because sports are supposed to bring everyone together. This was very, very divisive. And in the very center of this picture, it's the figure of their false Messiah. Jesus is at the center, and then all his disciples are right and left of him, and they had a very sort of overweight woman. It was a bit immodest. I'm not going to show the picture. And anyway, there was this crazy thing that happened, and people are talking about it. So we want to explore a little bit, because we have here an intersection of different topics that are very interesting. One of them is Christianity versus modern secular society and culture, modern and postmodern. And the other thing is this whole transgender movement. And so this intersection is something very timely. The Western culture today is at a crossroads. And what's really going on here is that this is basically European culture deconstructing itself. And this has a lot of consequences to the future of Europe, to the present of Europe. And we're also going to explore this from a Jewish perspective. So we're going to dive into this. But the main topic we're going to talk about, because I've been asked about this, and I've already addressed it in some previous classes, not this year, but in previous years, this whole transgender topic. People are constantly trying to figure it out. It's so big in the world today. It's massive. It appears that if you're against it, you're unprogressive and you're medieval and there's no use talking to you. But on the other hand, so many people realize something has gone wrong here. But we want to understand it. And we don't want just to negate it. Of course, we don't want to be for it. We want to understand what it means, where it's coming from, to get a deeper perspective on all of this. We have to basically rise above the usual din of arguments that are going on. Every hot topic, the debate gets heated, and then it becomes like a conversation between two deaf people, and they become even more deaf because they're being polarized more and more the more the debate gets heated. So we need to cool things down and get a deeper perspective on what they mean. So I spoke about this, I wrote about this in Hebrew. There's actually a book coming out about this whole topic, the whole LGBT movement, and in particular the transgender element. Hopefully it'll be in English at some point also. But I'm going to give you my basic thesis, and I think it's very eye-opening, and I think it's important for all of us to think about. So basically my thesis is the following. So we'll start with the main words, or the two main sets of words or pairs of words that are being thrown around regarding this topic. So the first is binary versus non-binary. So people seem to get very excited about realizing or talking about the fact that gender isn't really binary. We used to think it was binary. We grew up in a world that we thought it was binary, but no, they're here to tell us that it's not true. It's not binary. It's far more complicated and nuanced, and it's different for everyone, and it's very rich and expansive, and your gender identity doesn't need to conform, that's the words they're using, to the simple stereotypical binary of male female. And they want to celebrate it, and that's very much what that Olympic segment was all about. It was all about subverting the binary of the male female and sort of celebrating in a way that, again, many people, billions of Christians around the world didn't see it as any kind of celebration. They saw it as something very offensive. And of course Jews, and of course Muslims, anyone who's a little bit of, has some tradition to them and is basically not part of this progressive woke culture that's trying to, again, deconstruct this whole notion of male-female. But for them, the people doing this, and they got to have a segment in the opening of the Olympics, it's a big thing, and it's all over the popular culture, is they're celebrating the concept that gender isn't binary. So that's the first pair of concepts we have to tackle, is binary versus non-binary. And the second pair of concepts is sex versus gender. They used to be synonyms. Gender basically used to be a more polite word for sex that you would put on forms. It's sort of impolite to ask what sex you are, so you ask what gender you are, and you would write male or female. So it used to be absolute synonyms. But over the past few decades, and this was pushed by academic circles, by basically the gender studies people, is they started saying that sex and gender are totally different things. Then they're saying, well, okay, yeah, maybe biological sex is binary. There are men and women. We're not arguing against that. Some are arguing, but some are not arguing. They're saying sex is simple, it's biological, but gender, that's a whole other thing. What is gender? Gender is something far richer and more complicated. It's what you feel, it's how you behave, it's all the different cultural associations or concepts that seem to go along with the concepts of male and female. So we have to separate. And sex is maybe binary, but gender, that's a whole new story. We have to write tons of books about it and talk about it and allow any kind of expression because that's who people are and they need to express themselves. So let's try and go into this and basically make all of this make sense. We want to find our way in this labyrinth. It's not that complicated of a labyrinth. It appears complicated. It's not very complicated. And I'm going to try and simplify it for you. So we'll start with something very solid we can all hold on to. And that is that biological sex is, in fact, absolutely binary. It is absolutely binary. It's not nearly absolutely binary. It's absolutely binary. Why am I saying that? And it appears to be problematic even in Torah terms, what I'm saying. I'll explain in a minute. But it is absolutely binary. Why? Because in nature, and this is all the way up from plants to human beings, with all the other species of plants and animals in between, there are only two gametes. Gametes are the procreative cells, and these are the ovum and the sperm, the egg and the sperm. So the egg and the sperm there's only two types of gametes. There's no third type, there's no spectrum, there's nothing in between. There are only two kinds. And basically, male and female in nature are the carriers of the egg and the sperm. The sperm is called the small gamete because it's always smaller, and the egg is called the large gamete because it's always larger. And the female is the one that carries the egg and is destined to carry in some way the fetus or the egg or whatever it is, and the male is the one that carries the sperm. And so this is just, we need to know this. A very simple fact we all need to know is that nature is based on there being two gametes, and what we get out of this is we get a reshuffling of genes, which is vital to the dynamics of nature, to each organism being a little bit different, and then change can happen and variation can happen, and that's what life is all about. So now there are rare cases in human beings of what is today known as intersex, and it was actually referred to in Jewish law, in halacha, millennia ago, which in halacha was called androgynous, an androgynous person. And now it's called intersex. It's not one phenomenon, actually, it's several, but they're all connected, extremely rare. And these are cases in which a fetus that was supposed to develop into either male or female, that's what I said, that the binary is absolute. Even the androgynous or intersex types were supposed to be male or female, but something went wrong along the way. The process of creating an organism is very, very complicated. It's very long. It's like a conveyor belt with many stages, and each stage something can go wrong. And so sometimes in nature things go wrong, just like there are random mutations and rare illnesses and so on. There are rare cases of people born and they're not absolutely male or female, and they have both male and female anatomy, and their genes can be not XX or XY, but something like XXYY or XXY. And other versions. This is extremely rare. It's not what the transgender movement is all about. And it was actually addressed by Jewish law, by the Talmud, again, millennia ago. It was addressed because it was a phenomenon, a rare, but a phenomenon that needed addressing. And it was addressed. It was addressed that in some cases they should be referred to as male, in some cases as female, and in many, many cases as neither, as its own category, and its own halachic category is the category of the androgynous, the androgen, or in today's language, the intersex person. But all this doesn't change the fact that the foundation of nature, the way nature is built, is that there has to be male-female. It's extremely deeply rooted. Is that there's male and female, it has to do with the gametes. So that's the first thing to know. Now, what about the other two notions that were presented? And these are the new notions, the revolutionary notions, that gender is different from sex, that gender identity or gender feeling or gender expression, it's a little bit different, and it can be non-binary. Well, what does that mean? Well, interestingly, it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the fact that our soul, our subjective inner world, and also the brain, which is it's the embodiment of the soul. It's where the soul is seated, or the soul inhabits, and it manifests the soul. Both our inner subjective world and, in fact, the brain itself are more complex than the simple binary that we have on the level of gametes and on the level of genetics and on the level of what we call gross anatomy, the simple anatomy by which you can identify when someone is born. You say it's a boy, it's a girl, just by looking at their body. The brain, and of course, all the more so, our personality is unbelievably complex. It's far, far more complex than the binary simple system of being either male or female. In fact, the brain is the most intricate and complex entity or physical object that we have known throughout the world. Nothing is even close to being as complex as the brain. And so human beings, we are created in the image of God. We are extremely open-ended beings. We are highly, highly adjustable and highly, highly flexible, and the brain has the highest level of plasticity. It's called. It can change. It can open to new ideas. That's why the human culture is so varied. That's why we're able to live under all kinds of circumstances, all kinds of climates, and believe almost anything. There's almost nothing in the world that you wouldn't find a group that believes in some sort of system. So there's so many systems, belief systems that we have. That's because we are extremely complex creatures. So we can create imagined realities, and we can even tap into a host of non-physical realities, which may be very real, but we're tapping into them due to our, again, very, very complex nature, which is basically, that's why the mind is different from the body. The body is simple. But as we're reaching towards the mind, we're talking about the brain, that's like the portal between the body and the mind. Already there, it's becoming unbelievably complex. And of course, the level of the mind itself, of mental realities, is infinitely complex, because everything is possible in our imaginations and in our heads. Now, here indeed, we find that there is a spectrum of atypical personality types. When you're looking at human beings, not their gross anatomy, that is almost entirely binary. On the level of gametes, it's absolutely binary, and on the level of gross anatomy, it's almost absolutely binary, except for the rare intersex cases. But when you're looking at personalities, at people, at the way they feel, the way they behave, their body language, their different biographies, all this, we find a spectrum of atypical personality types. In fact, most men are not typically masculine, and most women are not typically masculine. It's like a bell curve, and you have a lot of people outside of the central area where it's the typical one. So many people are not stereotypical. Thank God, where everyone is very different. So you can have many men that are very effeminate, and many women who are more masculine, or what we used to call tomboy, and all this. And this is a good thing. This is the way individuality works. Individually, we're very, very complicated. Now, very interestingly, this idea that while the body is binary, the sex is binary, what is now called the gender experience, or the gender expression, or the gender subjective world, the fact that this is more complicated is really reflected in the Torah. Because the Torah has a revealed dimension, and that's the level of basically Jewish law and the simple reading, the literal reading of all the stories that we have. And on that level, we're talking about men and women, and even that intersex category, androgynous, it became a category. So it's discrete thinking. The revealed level of the Torah is talking about discrete categories. So you have the category of the male and the female, and if you happen to be born with an atypical anatomy, there's also a category for that. But it's very divided, it's very distinct. But when you go into the hidden, or the esoteric, the inner level of the Torah, which is the level of Kabbalah and Chassidut, which is the main topic of our classes, we actually find a lot of room for things that are outside the binary. And so basically, the way Kabbalah and Chassidut describe the soul is that the soul is a mosaic of many different character traits, including many different male-female character traits. So my body is male, and your body is, if you're male, you're male, if you're female, you're female. But our minds, our souls are much more complicated. It's a mosaic. And we all have many different male attributes and many different female attributes. More than that, you can have dominant properties, attributes, that are the opposite of your biological sex. That is, there can be a soul that inhabits a male body, but that in Kabbalah is characterized as a feminine soul, and vice versa. You can have someone who's a woman, absolutely a woman. There's no argument about what a man is. It goes by the body. But there are women that, according to Kabbalah, they have masculine souls. And this goes all the way to the most extreme version of this, which is actually telling us in several Kabbalah sources. These are rare cases and rare sources, but they exist. We have to address them. We have to know that they exist. They actually talk about there being a male soul, not just a masculine soul, but the soul of a male inhabiting a woman's body and the soul of a woman inhabiting a male body. So I'll just give you an example. A biblical story, Tamar and Yehuda. Tamar seduced Yehuda. He was basically supposed to let her marry his third son, and he didn't do it. And she ended up seducing him. She dressed up as a prostitute and she seduced him. An important story in Genesis. In a book called Magid Meisharim, 16th century Kabbalistic book, written, by the way, by Rabbi Yosef Karo, the writer of the Shulchan Aruch, the most major halachic text. He also was a Mekubal, a Kabbalist. He explains at length that Tamar was a woman, but she had the soul of a man. And Yehuda was a man, but he had the soul of a woman. And it was absolutely okay. It worked. It's not described as a punishment or something negative. It's just a rare thing that happens for all kinds of reasons. And because they complemented each other, both physically and spiritually, it worked. As a couple, it worked. But it explains why she was the one initiating and doing the courting, basically, and doing playing the masculine role. So all this is addressed in Kabbalah. So we know in Kabbalah that each one is a mosaic of male-female attributes, and the dominant feature could actually be the opposite of the biological sex. However, and this is a capital letter however, the Jewish perspective is that this spiritual, psychological, mental mosaic is embodied in a body that's either male or female. This complex, multidimensional, multi-layered, multifaceted creature that is called the soul is embodied in a body that's either male or female. So the full, let's call it the gender or sex gender portrait of the human being is that we have a soul that's multifaceted, but it inhabits a body that's either or. So in an interesting way, it addresses the non-binary culture that's going on today, but it also addresses the binary fact of biology. And in fact, more than that, it tells us that ultimately your identity should be based not on the subjective experience, which is very dynamic and very complex, but it should be based on the body. Why? Because the body is your anchor to objective reality. It anchors you. If you untie your boat you unanchor your boat and from the shore of reality, then you start drifting into the ocean of subjective feelings. And that's dangerous. It's not a good thing to do. So you have the ocean. It's an ocean. Your mind is an ocean. The spiritual world is an ocean, including every form of combination of male-female attributes. But it needs to be anchored to a wharf, to the shore, to objective facts, and that's your body. And so when that Kabbalistic book talked that Tamar had a male soul, it didn't say she was a man trapped in a woman's body. It would say that she was a woman with a male soul. Different description of the same thing, but a much better description, because this description doesn't lead into changing your body with the hormones and the surgery. It leads into accepting your body, embracing your body, but also embracing your soul, which may be different. And you go by your biological sex. Why? Because this is steady and objective, and basically it's a reflection of God's will as to who you're supposed to be, at least in this incarnation, in this life. Maybe next life you'll be, if I'm a man now, maybe in my next life I'll be a woman. Maybe in my previous life I was a woman. I don't know. But in this life, it is God's will, and in fact, it's my own inner, superconscious soul will, because God asks each creature to agree to how it's created, a major principle in Talmudic thinking. In the Talmud, it says that every being in the world accepted its the form in which it was born. Every fish, every animal, every bird, every human being, we accepted, we signed on the contract, on the dotted line, that we're willing to go into this body with this particular set of traits and this particular time in history and to this pair of parents and everything that goes along with this. We agree. So it's both God's will and it's our own will, but it's a super conscious will. Our body reflects what we agreed to have in this life, in this world. So we have both the level of the non-binary soul and the level of the binary body. And in an interesting way, we can say that this is the most non-binary thing to have. Why? Because in an ironic way, all these people that are shouting that they want to be non-binary and they don't want to conform to the binary norms, all these people are making another binary, which is their binary is binary thinking versus non-binary thinking. And they're saying binary thinking is old-fashioned, it's passé, it's previous generations, it's stereotypical, we need to get rid of it, and now we need to celebrate non-binary. And this is a new kind of binary. If you really want to be non-binary, you would say, let's accept both elements. There is a binary. There is a sex biological binary. It's there. You can't ignore it. You're embodied within it. It's in every fiber, in every cell of your body. You have that binary. But you also have, you're right, you also have the non-binary subjective world. But be careful not to untie your boat from the shore and let it drift, because there's no knowing where you'll get. Okay, so what is going on today? So my theory is as follows. The world is now tired of purely binary thinking, of thinking only in binary terms. Why? Because it's overly stereotypical. It focuses too much on the biological body and not enough on our psyches and our inner world. It doesn't address the mosaic, the individual nature, the individual difference between each and every person. And it also goes with a lot of baggage on what femininity and masculinity are supposed to be. Much of that baggage is indeed in need of revision and updating. It's very, very stereotypical and old-fashioned. And we've advanced. We've advanced meaning we are more sensitive to each individual being very, very unique and also not necessarily conforming to the stereotypical picture of the man and the woman, and we don't want to go back to the age in which men were men, or men were real men and women were real women. People, the world as a whole, culture as a whole, is sort of fed up with this, and rightly so, because the previous generations were not sensitive enough and didn't give enough room to the individual. And if you were a little bit of what they call the sissy boy, then you would suffer. And the macho boys would make fun of you. And if you were a tomboy, you would be made fun of. And that's unfair, because we are very, very different. And a stereotypical society is a suffocating society. So the general feeling, an unconscious zeitgeist, like the spirit of the times, is that we don't want to go back. It was suffocating, only thinking in binary terms. But the problem is that on the way to creating a world that has more complex and nuanced thinking about gender and masculinity and femininity, and giving room to the psyche, to the soul with all its complexity, on the way to this thing, they started ignoring or sort of jumping over or dismissing the biological binary level. And they started seeing this as a kind of something that's unimportant. It's merely the body. It's merely the biology. It's only the anatomy. It doesn't really mean anything. And when you start ignoring that, and you start only talking about the non-binary spectrum element of each one being very different and having both masculine and feminine attributes, and you do that while ignoring the level of the body or dismissing it or disregarding it, then this is something unbalanced, and it's not true. So the idea is that the LGBT movement, as crazy, as very secular, as very unrespectful of tradition as it may be, and as going against explicit Torah biblical prohibitions, all this doesn't take away from the fact that every phenomenon, every new movement in the world, according to Kabbalah, has a holy root. It has a holy root. It descends from something that's good and holy, a kernel of an idea that wants to come into the world, but is coming into the world in a very simplistic or very coarse way that we need to peel away the way it appears and get to the divine, holy, sacred root of it. So the root of this whole gender bender movement, of the whole LGBT movement, the root is that it's trying to make us notice and appreciate the fullness of the individual psychological makeup that we all have. That it's very, very varied and very wide and very different from person to person. And the gender thing is a mosaic there. It doesn't conform to the biological duality. But again, the problem is that you can't jump over the level of the body, of the embodiment. This is a culture that talks about disembodied gender. And it wants to just skip over the body, and then not only dismiss the body as mere vessel, mere garment, it also wants to then reshape the body. It sees the body as malleable. It wants to reshape relationships, reshape norms of behavior, and even reshape the body itself with new means that we've acquired that are basically hormones and surgery. So the result is that instead of having a more complex and nuanced worldview, you have a far more simplistic worldview, a very one-dimensional ideology, and also a very dangerous one. Because then you can start saying every teenager, or even younger than teenager, if they say that maybe they belong to a different gender, we should fast track them into taking hormones and puberty blockers and all kinds of crazy things. And this, I'm happy to say, it's beginning to backpedal, because many of these teenagers that grew up realized that that much harm was done to them. That instead of the responsible adults being responsible adults and telling them, hang on, wait, you're a teenager, you're going through some phases, hang on, wait until you're older to decide, they out of wanting to sort of be compassionate and to be enlightened, to be progressive, they told them, okay, let's go with whatever you want, whatever you say, and put them on hormones, and they became the horrible things. They became castrated, and they became infertile. And so very dangerous ideology, very dangerous one-dimensional simplistic ideology, which you can also then forcefully advance and fight against the opponent. And that's what we're seeing in the world today. So all this is very wrong, but at its root, if you sort of boil it down to the main message it's trying to get across, there is something very real, very true about that message. But the problem is that it has to go along with a much more respect to the physical sex into which we are born. This isn't some random thing. This isn't some, our body is not just some vehicle into which we were randomly dropped. And possibly we were dropped into the wrong vehicle. And no vehicle will ever reflect my fluid and multifaceted gender identity. It doesn't contradict. You can be absolutely a man, absolutely a woman, and also be very, very, very much an individual with your own different character traits. And you can be a man with a lot of feminine properties, and that's a wonderful thing. You can be a woman with some very, very masculine properties. It's a wonderful thing. But you're a woman. You're not a man in a woman's body. You're not a woman in a man's body. You're a man and a woman, and because this is an objective fact, we can see it. And this is not something that we're not drifting in the ocean of subjective feelings. Now, here comes another interesting element to all of this. And now we're going to tie it back into this event of the opening of the Olympic Games. Where is this dualistic, disembodied idea of the soul? Where does it come from? It wasn't born 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago. This is deeply rooted. The progressive culture today, which is very, very secular on the surface, is actually rooted And it's taking its inspiration and it's growing out of something much more ancient. And unbelievably, this is actually coming from Christianity. To be precise, it's coming from a strain of Greek philosophy, which then led into Christianity, which became the world's biggest religion. And I'll explain what I mean. There is, first, why the connection between the Greek and Christianity goes like this. We all know the expression Judeo-Christianity or Judeo-Christian. People are saying, because Christianity grew out of Judaism, there's a certain set of values that have to do with monotheism, with the Bible, and we call it the Judeo-Christian tradition. And it's true. Christianity does come out of Judaism. It took much of the elements from Judaism, and that influenced the West. It formed the West. And so Judeo-Christianity is a major part of the West. But we also have to realize there's something else. Another tradition isn't well enough acknowledged, which is the Greco-Christian tradition. The Greco-Christian tradition is things that Christianity took from Greek thinking that are alien to Judaism. It didn't take it from Judaism because it wasn't there in the Bible or in Talmud in the times of the Second Temple when Jesus lived. It wasn't there at all. It's totally not a Jewish concept. It's a Greek concept. And that also entered Christianity because the founders, especially Paul, founders of Christianity were steeped in Greek philosophical thinking. They were steeped in Greek philosophical thinking, and they took elements that are foreign to Judaism, and that became a major part of Christianity. It has nothing to do with Judaism. This is a Greco-Christian tradition. And one of this is a deeply dualistic paradigm of the way the body and the soul work. In some elements, major elements, we're talking Plato, greatest philosopher, and that led to other philosophers and again led into Christianity. There was a very, very radical or strict dualism between the body and the soul. The body was merely a vessel, a garment, and even a prison. So we're talking today, transgender people are saying, I'm trapped in a woman's body or in a man's body. They're unconsciously repeating things that Plato said. Plato said the body is a prison for the soul. And the philosopher is practicing throughout their lives to get rid of the body. You can't kill yourself, that's immoral. And it's wrong. But you're waiting for the moment that you'll be able to die, and then you'll be released. And you're practicing all your life as a philosopher so that the soul will be free from the body. So the body is a prison. And Christianity took this, and that's why the ideal in Christianity is for the soul to finally leave this world in some rapture, in some divine ecstasy, and to be released from this world, because this world is, and this duality is in the writings of Paul in the New Testament. Every page, it's how terrible the body is, how lowly the body is, how it pulls you down, and how wonderful the soul is, and they're absolute in conflict, total conflict. This is very, very alien to Jewish thinking. Of course, Jews and Judaism also talks about the body and soul as distinct. But the relationship between them is absolutely different. Because the relationship between the soul and the body is that the soul is coming into the world, it inhabits the body, and its role and purpose is to rectify the body. And the ideal is to turn this world, the physical world and the body, into a dwelling place for God, an abode for God. And so the ultimate vision of Judaism is not disembodied souls, it's reincarnated souls that go back to their body. There's a reincarnation of the dead, and the souls are in their body, and there's a physical building, a physical temple, in which the connection between the spiritual world and the physical world is constantly manifested in a place called the Holy of Holies, which is a sort of touching point between the non-physical and the physical. And all of Jewish law talks about the main connection to God is physical acts. These are the commandments. So the relationship between the man and between the soul and the body is far more holistic, basically. It's far more about the soul is inept without the body, and the body is dead without the soul. There's an image, a metaphor in the Talmud that talks about the body being blind and the soul being crippled. But the soul sitting on the body, it's like the seeing person, but crippled, a seeing crippled person sitting on a blind walking person. And then they can do things, because the one that sees tells the body where to go, and the body goes. And only together are they responsible for their actions, and only together do they form the full image of what the human being is. And I hate to break this to people who maybe come from a Christian background, but it was very, very different in Christianity. Christianity, if you compare Talmudic sources about the body and the soul and New Testament sources, it's very clear there that Christianity has adopted the radical dualism of Plato, that talks about Platonic love, which is disembodied love, and talks about the world of ideas, and talks about release from the body. And Christianity took that and turned that from philosophy to theology. But the Jewish theology was very, very different. And we never, ever saw the body as merely a vessel. And the soul is the only thing that counts. It was holistic, and the purpose of the soul coming into the world, and it has a window of opportunity, and the 1 hour in this world is more precious than eternity in the world to come, because this is the chance for the soul to inhabit the body and do something meaningful, and really, really connect to God and do God's will, and turn the physical world into a dwelling place for God. Now, what is happening today in our culture, and what happened in the Olympics? What's happening is that you have 2,000 years of Greco-Christian dualism, very radical dualism, that dismisses the body as a prison, as merely a vessel, as something that pulls you down, something you want to transcend. It's also, by the way, why Christians, their ideal throughout Catholic history, to this day, the ideal, the spiritual ideal, is never to marry and never to have children, because it pulls you down into the body. There was never an ideal in Judaism. There was one Talmudic figure who said, I'm sorry, I can't marry. I can't lose the Torah. He was the exception to the rule. One person, Ben Azai, who didn't marry, or possibly was married but then never remarried. And the ideal, the first mitzvah, the first commandment is to procreate, and it's not good for the person to be alone, and we need to marry, we need to partake in the physical realm of bringing children into the world. Christianity, throughout the history of Catholicism, and again to this day, the Protestant version is different, but it also needs to justify the sources in the New Testament that tell us, that Paul tells his believers, that his followers, that the ideal is to be like me and never marry. That's the ideal. If you can't help yourself, second best option, okay, marry. And we'll call it a sacrament, so you don't feel too bad about yourself. But you will feel bad about yourself because you know that it's second best. And that the best would have been never to marry. So you have 2,000 years of radical dualism, and they're crashing into a wall. And the wall is 100 years, much less than 2,000, 100 years of materialism. Of a notion, a secular notion, that says that there is no world to come, there is no soul, there's only the mind, the brain. We don't have a soul. Soul has become like a taboo word. There's this world. So what's the result? One of the results is the transgender movement. What the transgender movement is doing is it's taking the radical dualism of the 2,000 years of more than 2,000. If we're going into Greek philosophy, we're talking almost 4,000 years of Greco-Christian dualism, which is the source of dismissing the body, seeing the body as something you can just change and replace, and it doesn't tell you anything about your true identity. This is coming from millennia of dualism. But now we're not waiting for some rapture to take us into the world to come. We only have this world. So what do? Well, let's change the body to fit my gender identity. Let's take hormones, and let's do surgery, and let's dress up, and let's do all the things, because now I have to have the body, because I'm a materialist. I'm a modern person. I want to live in this world. I don't believe in paradise. So I want the body to reflect the way I think my soul feels. It's not my soul. It's just whatever it is that I'm influenced by from media, basically. That's another thing, by the way, a difference between the Kabbalistic concept of souls inhabiting opposite bodies is that this was in a culture that didn't celebrate it. Once you have a culture that celebrates it, and media is full of it, you'll have a whole generation of teenagers who want, because it's trendy, and they want to join this culture, and they want to be of the opposite gender and so on. So anyway, the point is that you want everything has to exist in the body, but the body is meaningless as to who you really are. So you feel what you feel, you latch onto a part of the mosaic or several parts of the mosaic, and then you have to express it. And then we end up with the transgender culture, and we end up with that show that they had on the Olympics of crazy people that you can't tell if they're male or female, you can't tell if they're men or women or how were they born. It's so confusing to the eye. And that was the whole point. Well, the whole point was to make a mess of everything and to show you the mosaic while totally ignoring the physical binary. So let's try and sort of gather all the threads and sum all this up. What's going on today, and this is going to open up a whole new topic. I'm not going to go into the topic, but it's sometimes nice when you're closing one topic to show that now you're on the boundary of maybe an even more serious topic. What's going on in Europe today for about 100 plus years is that European culture, which was very, very sophisticated and very high, and had the highest, most beautiful, most sophisticated art in music and in dance and in painting, and there's no comparing European art and its tradition, its history to any other, place in the world. It is deconstructing itself to death, basically. And the main sort of culprit or the main entity on the seat, on the accused, the seat of the accused, the defendant, is Christianity. They're trying to get away with Christianity. They're trying to make fun of Christianity. That's why they took this Christian picture of the Last Supper and made fun of it, or turned it upside down and all of this. They're basically guilty. They feel guilty that Christianity led to colonialism, and Christianity led to the West thinking it was the best and highest culture in the world, which allowed itself to conquer the world, and they're filled with guilt. There's European white guilt. It's also in America. They're guilty about the European Western civilization, and they're trying to make fun of it. But ironically, all of this deconstruction, all of this spirit, which is trying to take everything apart and take all notions of sacred and secular, of high and low, of male and female, and just tear it all down, all this is actually growing out in a deep way from Christianity. The seeds of destruction were there in Christianity itself, for two reasons. One, we spoke about. One is the seeds of dualism were there. They came from Greek philosophy through Christianity and have actually led to the rise of the transgender movement and the way it dismisses the level of the body, which now causes a lot of Catholic people to stress how important the body is. That's what Catholic thinkers are doing now. They're saying the body is the most important thing in the world, which is contradictory to what they said for thousands of years, and contradictory to the ideal of not marrying, not having children, and all of this. But now they're saying the body is the most important thing. But their dualism is what led to this. And the other thing that led to this is the whole concept of focusing on guilt, on self-flagellation, on being apologetic, on turning the other cheek. What is happening now is that this spirit of being only meek and only humble and only sorry for having power and being strong, you apologize for it, it's now being applied to Christianity itself. Christianity did it to the empires and to people who thought that they had everything in the world and they wanted to be powerful, and tell them, no, you have to be meek, you have to be small, you have to be humble, you have to turn the other cheek. Now the same thing is applied to Christianity itself, and that's why Christianity is basically dismantling itself. It comes from the dualism that led to the transgender movement, and it comes from this apologetic stance of feeling guilty when you're strong, and that is also now applied to Christianity. And so the Europe is basically taking itself apart. And the thing that all this is leading to is that it creates a vacuum. It creates a big, big vacuum. Because Europe doesn't believe in itself anymore. It reflects in how many children they're having, and it's reflected in how many immigrants they brought in. And basically what is going on today is that this is the swan song of European culture, because the many, many, many millions and millions of migrants from Muslim countries or African countries that are not non-Western, and most of them are Muslim, who came into Europe over the past years and are seeing this spectacle of the opening of the Olympics, are saying, we're going to have nothing of this, and we're going to take over. And recently, the same country, France, the left came into power. There was a revolution, and the more radical left came into power. And the rally, the victory rally, that the new prime minister came out to speak to the people, that rally had more Palestinian flags than flags of France. And so a few weeks later, they're having the Olympics, and they're celebrating this crazy transgender drag thing. They're not realizing where this is leading. They're basically tearing themselves down, taking themselves apart, and this is opening itself to another religion, which has none of this crazy dualism. Islam doesn't have the dualism of Christianity, and it doesn't have the apologetic stance. And it's going to take over Europe, and it's already happening. So where does all this lead us? It leads us to what the role of Judaism is in this new world order that's coming into being. Our role is to teach the right balance in many, many different areas, but especially, to sum up this class, we need to teach the right balance between holding on to the gender mosaic on the one hand and holding on to the sex binary on the other hand. If we only have the sex binary, it suffocates the individual. If we only have the gender mosaic, we're drifting into the ocean of self-image and fantasy. But if we have the gender mosaic embodied in the level of the sex binary, that's a good balance. That's a right balance. That's the true reason this whole movement, the LGBT movement, came into the world, is to basically shout at everyone, we're not just biological sex. We're not stereotypical. Everyone is very different, and you have to pay attention to that. And that's a very Hasidic concept. We want this concept, but without all the crazy baggage on the outside. And another balance we have to strike, we have to teach, is the balance between meekness and humility, and not being arrogant, not being prideful, on the one hand, but also standing tall and being loyal and being unapologetic about the values of monotheism and the values of the Torah, the values of the Bible, the values of religion. And this is a balance that's also very hard to maintain. And because Christianity is unbalanced, because it's too much dualistic and it's too much apologetic, it's now disintegrating and making room for Islam. And if we don't want that to happen, we need to find ways, all of us, to teach the world about how to balance the gender mosaic and the sex binary, and how to balance the humility and meekness and lowliness with holy pride, standing tall, unapologetically protecting, upholding the values of monotheism. So may we all become stronger through this class in this mission and this calling to bring to the world these balances, and to hopefully sooner rather than later bring this balance into the world and avoid the horrible clash of civilizations, or as Netanyahu just called it now, the clash between barbarism and civilization. Avoid it as much as possible, and bring true, holy, divine balance into the world. Amen. Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this episode, please press like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. If you want more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much, and see you in the next episode.